The unrelenting B-29 bomber offensive against the Japanese home islands in 1944-45 led the Japanese to attempt to deny the Americans the use of their new airfields in the Mariana Islands. The Japanese military police, the Kempei-tai, had a special services department that dreamed up commando operations to rival some of the great raids launched by the Allies during the war. By late 1944, B-29s were flying in force against targets in mainland Japan, and Japanese air defenses were inadequate to stop them burning down cities virtually at will. Desperate times called for desperate measures. The Kempei-tai, working closely with Army intelligence, decided that the best way to neutralize the B-29 threat was not by trying to knock them out of the skies over Japan, but by destroying the aircraft at source, that is, on their newly captured airfields. Japanese had already tried launching conventional bombing missions against these airfields, but the results had been negligible, as American fighter cover and anti-aircraft defenses were extremely strong, and Japanese losses in men and planes made the missions pointless. The kamikaze operations around Okinawa had, however, borne some fruit for the Japanese, and it was becoming clear to higher command that the only way to strike the Americans hard was to send young, determined and brave men on one-way missions. They would sell their lives dearly for their emperor and nation, without harboring thoughts of survival, making such men formidable and determined adversaries. The Japanese plan called for a new kind of kamikaze unit, a commando force able to land by sea or by air to physically destroy the parked B-29s on the airfields and cause as much damage and confusion as possible before they were killed in action. The Japanese army already had a division-sized force of paratroopers that had been raised in 1941 and formed part of the Army Air Service. The Imperial Navy also maintained marine parachute units. The army paratroops were divided into raiding brigades and regiments, and they had first seen action in 1942 when they had dropped on the oil fields at Palembang in Sumatra during the Japanese invasion of the Dutch East Indies. On the 6th of December 1944, a 750-strong detachment from the 2nd Raiding Brigade had dropped on American airfields in the area of Leyte in the Philippines. Managed to destroy some aircraft and inflicted casualties on the US, but ultimately the entire Japanese force had been wiped out. Now, in late 1944, the Japanese searched around for a man to lead a new Kempei-tai control commando unit, and discovered the bespectacled Captain Michiro Okuyama, the commanding officer of the 1st Raiding Regiment's engineer company. He and his men were highly trained in sabotage and demolition, and Okuyama had been the first member of the original Army Parachute Training Unit. He was known as an outstanding officer and leader of men, and he was highly respected by his superiors. Headquarters ordered Okuyama to select 126 men to form the new Geretsu Airborne Unit, making it clear that the mission they would be training for was a suicide assault from which none were expected to return alive. Okuyama selected his men, most of whom were fellow combat engineers and sabotage experts from his own regiment. Okuyama would lead the command section, while the assaulting groups were divided into 5 platoons. On the 5th of December 1944, the Geretsu Airborne Unit was assembled at the Army's Air Academy at Saitama. Okuyama's unit was joined by 10 Kempei-tai intelligence officers from the Nakano Intelligence School, bringing the unit's strength up to 136 men. At the academy, a mock-up B-29 was constructed and 2 new explosive devices quickly developed to deal with the American aircraft. The first was a 2-kilogram explosive charge on the end of a pole. On top of the charge was a rubber suction cup. The saboteur pushed the pole under the B-29's wing. The explosive charge stuck to the aircraft's skin. The second new weapon was a chain charge. The weapon could thus be thrown over a B-29's wings or fuselage and ignited. The training was intense. Captain Okuyama ordered that each commando must try to destroy at least 3 enemy aircraft. A mission was planned almost immediately on the basis of the demonstration, but the availability of aircraft to transport the commandos to their target was to cause a delay. The air squadron assigned to transport the commandos was Captain Suabe's 3rd Independent Flying Unit that transferred onto the Mitsubishi Ki-21-2 Sally bomber in readiness for the mission. The plan was deceptively simple. The Geretsu airborne unit would board a collection of Ki-21 bombers and fly south from Japan to the lonely volcanic island of Iwo Jima, where they would be refueled. The planes would then fly on to the American-occupied Mariana Islands and crash land on selected airfields. The commandos would then storm the Park B-29s and destroy as many aircraft and crewmen as possible, before taking up positions close to the airfields to deny their use by the enemy with small arms fire. The attack was scheduled for the 17th of January 1945 and would be launched from Hamamatsu Air Base on Honshu Island. American air attacks on the airfields located on Iwo Jima intensified before the Geretsu attack was launched, as part of the softening up of Japanese defenses before a full-scale invasion was launched. America wanted to use Iwo Jima as a kind of lifeboat anchored in the Pacific between the bases in the Marianas and Japan, so that damaged B-29s could divert and make emergency landings. The American bombardment of the Japanese airfields on Iwo Jima meant that refueling the Ki-21 medium bombers to be used by the Geretsu unit was out of the question. On their own, the Ki-21s lacked the range to fly directly from Japan to the Marianas, so the operation was cancelled. US Marines captured the airfields on Iwo Jima in March 1945, and it was proposed to use the Geretsu unit to effect their recapture, but the island's garrison fell before the plan could be put into operation. On the 1st of April, a massive American amphibious assault hit the big island of Okinawa, south of Kyushu. American forces captured the Japanese airfields at Yontan and Kadena on the island's west coast, and fighter interceptors shot down many of the Japanese kamikaze aircraft that launched mass attacks on American and British shipping supporting the invasion. Although the kamikazes managed to sink several ships and damage many others, American fighters flying from the 2 recently captured air bases seriously disrupted their effectiveness. Suddenly, the solution presented itself to the Japanese High Command on the 15th of May. Use the Geretsu airborne unit to neutralize Okinawa's airfields. Codenamed Operation Gi, the plan had a distinct advantage over the former operation against the Marianas. The Ki-21 medium bombers would be able to fly directly from Japan to Okinawa without any refueling. The Geretsu unit and the 3rd Independent Flying Unit were immediately moved south to Kengun Airfield on Kyushu. Preparations were hastily made for the assault on the 2 American bases. 3rd Flying Unit was equipped with 16 Ki-21s, with a further 4 in reserve. All of the bombers were stripped of their guns to save weight. Captain Okuyama, with the command section and 1st, 2nd and 5th platoons, would fly in 8 Ki-21s and assault Yontan Airfield. Captain Watabe, with the 3rd and 4th platoons, would take 4 aircraft and attack Kadena. The Geretsu unit would take off from Japan in the evening, timing their arrival at the American airfield just before midnight. Just before the commandos landed, 50 Army and Navy kamikazes would launch a mass attack on the airfields to provide a diversion, allowing the bombers to glide in and make wheels-up crash landings. Japanese commandos would then storm from the bombers, using their pole and chain charges to cripple American aircraft and destroy vital facilities, before taking up positions overlooking both bases, where their small arms fire would disrupt their effective operation. The following day, Operation Gi called for a mass kamikaze attack by 180 Japanese aircraft on the enemy fleets off Okinawa, supported by 30 conventional attack aircraft, including a few fitted with the Oka jet-powered flying bomb, which was also a suicide weapon. All going well, the American fighter defenses should have been severely damaged and their remaining planes grounded by Geretsu commandos firing across the runways. X-Day was set for the 23rd of May, but bad weather over Okinawa led to the operation being postponed for 24 hours. On the evening of the 24th, a short ceremony was held at the airfield at Kengun, as the men raised cups of sake arranged on long wooden trestle tables on the airfield and shouted banzai twice before taking a final sip. Captain Okuyama then gave the men a final rousing speech before they boarded their aircraft and made ready for departure. At 6:50 p.m., the first of the 12 bombers roared down the runway and took off, headed the 480 miles to Okinawa, and what the men hoped would be a glorious death in battle. 4 of the bombers aborted the mission with engine trouble and returned to Kengun. The remaining 8 flew on in formation before arriving over Okinawa. A radio message from the leading aircraft was picked up at Kengun, but nothing further was then heard from the Geretsu unit as the planes began to make their descent into Yontan airfield. The diversionary attacks had been launched by 7 waves of conventional bombers. Marine Corps and US Army anti-aircraft gunners shot down 11 Japanese bombers. At 10:30 p.m., 3 Ki-21 bombers appeared to be trying to land at Yontan, but their slow airspeed, low altitude, and regular course made them easy targets for the anti-aircraft batteries. These 3 all carried Geretsu commandos and were among only 4 aircraft that actually got onto the airfield, the other 4 being shot down by American fighters. Pilots of the 3 damaged Japanese bombers attempted to use their aircraft as a giant kamikaze, and with their commandos still aboard, they slammed into the ground. A number of the commandos actually survived the crashes and rushed out of the wreckage, firing their weapons into parked aircraft and setting demolition charges. Only one of the Geretsu unit's aircraft actually landed as planned. It swung in low through a hail of flak and wheels up, safely skidded across the runway, coming to rest only 80 yards from the control tower before 10 commandos poured out of its nose cone and doors and began to attack American aircraft. As it soon became clear that Japanese troops were on the ground, the American forces defending the airfield panicked and began firing wildly in all directions. It has been surmised that some of the damage inflicted on the airfield's facilities and aircraft and some of the American casualties were the result of this indiscriminate firing. All across the airfield, both Americans and Japanese were discharging weapons. Planes and vital facilities were going up in smoke. At first light, a Marine Corps unit was hastily dispatched to the airfield to hunt down and kill the remaining Geretsu commandos. The Japanese were all dead by 12:55 p.m. Altogether, the Americans collected together 69 dead Japanese from the wrecked planes or those strewn about the airfield. The Japanese commandos had managed to destroy 4 F-4U Corsair fighters and to damage a further 22. They had also destroyed 2 4-engined PB-4Y privateer patrol bombers and 4 Dakota transport planes. Damaged aircraft included 3 F-6F Hellcat fighters, 2 privateers and a pair of Dakotas. The Geretsu commandos also set on fire a massive tank containing 70,000 gallons of precious aviation fuel. American losses were 3 killed and 18 wounded. All of this destruction was largely caused by only 10 Geretsu commandos from the one intact Ki-21 that had belly-flopped on Yontan's runway, as well as by a few days' survivors from the crash landing of another. If the Geretsu unit had parachuted onto the target rather than attempted the assault by the dangerous method of crash-landing planes, more would have survived to continue their mission. The mass kamikaze attacks were launched against the Allied fleet on the 25th and 27th of May, Japanese not knowing if the Geretsu unit had successfully silenced at least one of the enemy's airfields. Unfortunately for the Japanese, Yontan was fully operational again by the afternoon of the 25th and the kamikazes were heavily defeated. The Geretsu commandos were undoubtedly brave and resourceful soldiers, but ultimately their sacrifice did not save Japan from inevitable defeat. The US airfields on Okinawa were back in business within hours of the attack. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also support my channel at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.